We'll also need a constructor function new for our Authenticator struct. And as per our diagram, we need to verify the token. So we need to implement a verify ID token function for the verification step as well. So the verify ID token will take our authentication token grant and it will exchange it and return an ID token. I want to implement that one first and we can deal with the constructor later. So inside the function, first we'll get a raw ID token as a string from the auth2 authentication token that we have. And we are going to bail out if we cannot parse the ID token. Then we'll create an OIDC config, which we only need to pass this client ID from auth2 configuration of our authenticator. Then we'll use the verifier constructor, which we inherit from this embedded OpenID Connect provider. And we pass our OIDC config to it, and then verify this raw ID token by passing a request context to that function as well. Which now I realize we don't have a context here, so let's add a parameter context to this function as an argument too. Context.context. And that finishes our verification ceremony actually. So onwards to this new constructor function. So inside our constructor function body, first, we are going to populate some variables by reading our environment configuration. And you can get all of these auth0 domain, client ID, client secret, and callback URL variables from your auth0 application settings page. And once we have all these variables at place, we'll create a new OIDC provider, which will point to our auth0 domain as well. Then we'll create an auth2 config with the following parameters. And especially pay attention to not forget this redirect URL. I have done once and you'll realize that you'll have trouble with everything essentially. You won't be able to sign up, log out, create accounts. So this redirect URL is essential. Don't forget it. Also, if you want to get some extra information from the provider, like the user's email or the user's profile information, you need to add them as scopes to this array of scopes as well. Otherwise, you won't get them back in the callback function that we are going to implement next. Plus, also make sure that you get this endpoint URL from the provider object that we just created. And finally, we'll assign provider and config to our authenticator struct, and then return a pointer to it as a return value out of this function. And that's all there is to do for the authentication boilerplate code. Like I said, auth0 helped us eliminate most of the boilerplate, so this much code is all we need to enable an authentication gateway integration for our web application. The rest of the user management and other heavy lifting will be handled by auth0 for us, so we can happily proceed with the rest of the application that we have.